Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Cody Hornaday here with Channel. I'm the TA for Southern Indiana and Kentucky. It's Friday, July 23rd, and while I know a lot of fungicide applications have been made, there's still a few out there making decisions on it, and I wanted to come at you today with a little bit of a different look at why we should be applying fungicides and what that does for you, the grower. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of different approach. I'm not going to talk about disease per se, and we all know fungicides kill disease, and we have disease pressure and things like that. I want to look at it from a plant physiology standpoint. And I've got this graph here that is essentially showing on the left-hand axis is total dry matter. And then on the right hand over here, this x-axis is showing percent accumulated. Okay, and I'm going to focus on that. And then on the bottom, we've got our different growth stages, also associated with each GDU at those growth stages. And I'm going to pay attention to basically VT on, and I want you guys to focus on some of the things that happen after we get through VT and why fungicides can have a huge impact on your profitability from VT on. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit closer so everybody can see what I'm going to do as I draw on this diagram, so you fully understand what parts of this graph I'm really talking about. All right, so let's take a look at this graph and kind of figure out exactly what we've got going on here. So basically, I mentioned a second ago, we're going to focus on VT afterwards, because you don't start to actually accumulate any grain until after VT, right? You go through pollination, you get those kernels pollinated, and then you start to fill them with starch. And that's the piece of this entire puzzle that I want to focus on the most. So as we get past VT, you're going to pay attention to this blue section, because that's the grain. Okay, so as we start to accumulate grain after about R1, that's when we think about applying fungicides, is at that VT R1 time frame. That's probably the most common time frame folks shoot for, and for good reason, because as we enter VT R1 through R2 and R3, you basically go through that point in the plant's life where kernel abortion is most likely. And so R1's pollination, so you've got to get through R1, but then R2 is blister, R3 is milk, and those 2 to 3 stages there are where that plant is most prone to what we always think about as tip back or kernel abortion. Okay, so if we put on a fungicide about right in here, okay, so you're at about that R1 time frame, you're getting that fungicide on about there, and then we've got 3 weeks worth of control from that fungicide. Some folks may advertise a little longer, but for simplicity's sake, let's think about 3 weeks, and that essentially gets you out here to R4. So you have covered this window right here. This is safe. Okay, we've got our diseases covered. We've got plant health covered from basically VT to R4, and we know, hey, we're good there, which is perfect, because again, that's protecting that plant from kernel abortion. The other thing it's doing is ensuring that any disease that is present here is not continuing to work its way up through the canopy, because this is a timeline, right? As you go along this timeline, that disease is continuing to work its way up that canopy. So if you've got that fungicide applied here at VT and R1, somewhere in there, you hold that disease down in the lower canopy. And that's crucial, because the upper canopy is where your photosynthesis is happening, right? That's your solar panels, is basically from the ear leaf up. That's what we usually try to think about as a tag leaf, is that ear leaf. And here's the piece that I don't think a lot of people really fully grasp, is why that is so important. Because as a grower, you sell weight, you don't sell total number of kernels, right? So you've got this number of kernels protected here, which is great, but the other thing you've done is slowed that disease down in the canopy, not allowing it to work its way up into the upper canopy, slowing down photosynthesis and basically destroying your solar panels. Because at R4 is the dough stage, okay? So that's kind of a little past what I would think of as when you eat sweet corn, right? You're past that milk stage, you're into the dough stage, and there's only 33%, if we draw a line over where this graph intersects, and if you only focus on this blue section right here, you have only accumulated about 33%, okay, of your dry matter at R4. And that dry matter is what you sell. That dry matter is the weight of the kernels. And that, I think, is oftentimes kind of taken for granted, especially as you look at R5. Let's draw a line straight up from R5, and you're basically right here. You go over, you've only got 50% of your dry matter accumulated at R5. R5 is dent, okay? And I've heard a lot of folks talk about how, hey, you know, once that corn starts to dent, it's made. And I'm here to tell you from a physiological standpoint, that could not be further from the truth. Okay, so if you think about a disease like gray leaf spot or northern corn leaf blight that works its way up into the canopy, if you don't protect it here and that thing continues to work up the canopy and it's at R5, is on the ear leaf and above, you can have major yield loss from the fact that you've destroyed a lot of solar panels for that last 50% of your dry matter accumulation. To put this in perspective, if, as an example, you were to go out and you just basically hand shelled a bunch of ears, you pulled a bunch of ears off to where there was no more dry matter to be accumulated, if that yield potential was 200 bushel, as an example, if you pull it off at R5, you've only got 100 bushels worth of weight accumulated. And that, I think, is just one of the most overlooked things there is when it comes to crop physiology and when corn really makes its yield, okay? So that is absolutely critical. So by doing this application, you begin to slow that disease down so it does not work its way up into the canopy to limit production at R5 or beyond. Now let's talk about another disease like southern rust. So southern rust can come in at any time. We know it's already around. It's been confirmed in northern Kentucky and southern Indiana. And everybody knows southern rust is one of those things that once it comes in and starts, if it gets the right conditions, can be extremely prolific. And with a disease that is extremely prolific, you can have a lot of yield loss even if it comes in late. If you see that disease come in at R4 or even beginning R5, and it starts to really destroy those solar panels of that upper canopy, you can still have major yield loss. And we saw this about 4 years ago when southern rust kind of made its debut, if you will, to at least southern Indiana as it worked up. I mean, we saw huge differences in fungicide applications that year because of southern rust of upwards of 40, 50, 60, 70 bushels or more. And that's because it's so prolific. And even when it comes in late at R5, it still has the ability to really hinder that last 50% of dry matter accumulation. And I can't emphasize that enough. By making this application, you slow down those diseases that work their way up into the canopy. And a lot of people don't think about applying a fungicide at R5 or R4 because in general, most of our diseases aren't prolific enough to cause issues. However, things like southern rust or even maybe tar spot, even coming in late, can still be very detrimental. So I want to be sure and emphasize that, hey, I want you guys to be out scouting even as you get past that dough stage, because there is still a lot of weight to be accumulated. And every time I've ever taken a load of corn across the scales, they didn't count the kernels, but they counted the pounds. Okay, and that pounds is super, super important to protect that plant from R4 on when it's really starting to pack those kernels full of weight. So just a little bit of a different look at what we do with fungicides and why they can be critical, even potentially with certain diseases that come in later. If they're really prolific, fungicides can still have a major impact even into the later portions of growth stages, where I know I have heard growers say, hey, that stuff's starting to dent, that corn's made. Even at beginning dent, you still have a lot of weight yet to accumulate. So just a little bit of a different way of looking at fungicides and why they're important in corn. Thank you.